the bass thrummed through the walls, rattling picture frames and sending vibrations across the hardwood floors. Mark Jensen stood at his living room window, watching as Karen Rodriguez's latest backyard bash spilled well beyond the boundaries of her own property. Empty beer bottles littered his immaculately maintained lawn, red plastic cups scattered like confetti between his carefully tended flower beds. This wasn't the first time, not by a long shot. Mark had moved to this quiet suburban neighborhood of Oak Ridge Estates 5 years ago, seeking peace after a grueling decade in corporate litigation. He was a man who valued order, precision, and respect, qualities that seemed to be in short supply whenever Karen decided to throw one of her infamous parties. Meg was different. The clock struck midnight, and the music showed no signs of stopping. Teenagers and 20-somethings spilled onto the street, their raucous laughter cutting through the night like a sharp knife. Mark's carefully cultivated rose bushes, a hobby he'd inherited from his late mother, were now trampled, beer-soaked casualties of Karen's complete disregard for basic neighborly courtesy. He tried everything: polite conversations, handwritten notes, calls to the local homeowners association, even a few stern discussions with Karen's landlord. Nothing worked. Each attempt was met with a dismissive wave, a rolled eye, or worse, complete indifference. Mark pulled out his phone, documenting the chaos. Broken glass glinted in the moonlight. A group of partygoers was now using his decorative garden gnomes as makeshift beer pong targets. One particularly intoxicated young man stumbled near his prized Japanese maple, nearly toppling the delicate tree he'd spent years nurturing. Something inside Mark snapped. The neighborhood had changed. What was once a tranquil street of professionals and retirees had become Karen's personal playground. Her rental property, a modest 2-story home she'd inherited from her grandmother, had transformed into a constant source of noise, trash, and destruction. He'd been patient, too patient perhaps. As another wave of bass-heavy music erupted and a group of drunk partygoers began singing off-key, Mark's mind began to work. His years of legal strategy weren't just for courtroom battles. They could be applied to more personal conflicts. Karen thought she was untouchable. She believed her youth and carefree attitude gave her a free pass to terrorize the neighborhood. But Mark had been collecting evidence, documenting every single infraction. And now he was going to make her understand the true meaning of consequences. The party raged on, oblivious to the storm brewing behind Mark's calm exterior. Little did Karen know, her days of unchecked mayhem were about to come to an abrupt and spectacular end. This was just the beginning. The morning after the party revealed the full extent of the destruction. Mark walked his lawn with a garbage bag, methodically collecting the debris left behind by Karen's guests. Each beer bottle, each crumpled cup felt like a personal insult. His meticulously maintained garden looked like a war zone. Trampled flowers, broken garden ornaments, and mysterious stains marring the pristine grass. This time, he would do more than just clean up. Mark worked as a senior legal consultant, a profession that had taught him the value of thorough documentation and strategic planning. He began by creating a comprehensive file. Digital photos captured every inch of damage. Timestamps from previous noise complaints were carefully logged. He even purchased a high-end security camera system, positioning it to capture every detail of the adjacent properties. The local police had been sympathetic, but ultimately ineffective. Noise ordinance violations seemed low on their priority list, especially in a neighborhood that was slowly transforming from a quiet residential area to a de facto party zone. Mark knew he needed more than just official complaints. He reached out to other neighbors discreetly. Mrs. Thompson, an elderly widow who lived 2 doors down, had been suffering in silence. The Rodriguez property's constant noise had become a nightmare for her, disrupting her sleep and peace of mind. Mr. Garcia, a night shift worker, shared similar frustrations. They had all been afraid to speak up, but Mark was different. Using his legal background, Mark began collecting signed statements. He researched Karen's rental agreement, discovering several clauses that she was blatantly violating. The property was technically owned by her elderly grandmother's estate, which added another layer of potential legal complexity. But Mark wasn't just building a case. He was crafting a strategy. He discovered that Karen worked as a social media influencer, relying heavily on her online reputation and brand partnerships. Her Instagram was a carefully curated world of perfect parties and carefree living, a world that could crumble with the right exposure. Late one evening, as Mark reviewed his growing file of evidence, a plan began to take shape. This wasn't about revenge, he told himself. This was about restoring order, about protecting the community's right to peace and quiet. Little did Karen know, the quiet, meticulous man next door was about to become her worst nightmare. The war was just beginning, and Mark intended to fight it with surgical precision. Mark's opportunity came sooner than expected. Karen was hosting another of her infamous parties, this time with a tropical luau theme that promised to be even more disruptive than usual. He had meticulously prepared, and now everything was in place. The evening began typically. Loud music, drunk guests spilling onto the street, the sound of shattering glass punctuating the night. But Mark was calm, almost clinical in his approach. He had made copies of every piece of evidence: noise complaints, property damage documentation, and statements from neighboring residents. His first move was strategic and surgical. Using his professional contacts, Mark reached out to several of Karen's primary social media sponsors. He crafted a detailed email package complete with photographic evidence of the repeated violations, police reports, and statements from affected neighbors. Each email was professionally worded, presenting the facts without emotion but with devastating clarity. Within hours, two of Karen's most lucrative brand partnerships began to investigate. A local fitness supplement company and a trendy beach wear brand both sent initial inquiries. Mark knew these companies valued their public image above all else. The suggestion of a nuisance neighbor was one thing. Documented evidence of consistent community disruption was another entirely. Meanwhile, he simultaneously filed a formal complaint with the Homeowners Association, attaching all the documented evidence. The association had been passive before, but the comprehensiveness of Mark's file made it impossible to ignore. As the party raged on that night, Karen remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing. She was too busy taking selfies, creating content for her social media, completely oblivious to the fact that her carefully constructed online persona was about to come crashing down. By midnight, Mark had also contacted the property management company that oversaw her grandmother's estate. The rental agreement clearly stipulated specific behavioral clauses that Karen had repeatedly violated. A formal warning was imminent. The most satisfying part for Mark wasn't the potential consequences, it was the precision of his approach. This wasn't blind revenge. This was a calculated dismantling of Karen's carefree lifestyle, piece by calculated piece. As the party wound down and guests began to stumble home, Mark sat in his study, a slight smile playing on his lips. The first domino had been pushed, and the chain reaction was just beginning. Karen Rodriguez was about to learn that actions have consequences, and some neighbors are not to be underestimated. The first signs of Mark's strategy emerged 2 weeks after his calculated intervention. Karen's Instagram feed, once a vibrant showcase of parties and sponsored content, began to show cracks. Her follower counts started to dip, and the engagement on her posts plummeted. One morning, she discovered an official letter from her primary brand sponsor, terminated effective immediately. The fitness supplement company cited reputation concerns and community conduct issues as their primary reasons. Another sponsor followed suit the next day, quietly cutting ties without public fanfare. Karen's normally confident demeanor began to crumble. The constant stream of party invitations dried up. Her social media influence, once a source of pride and income, now felt like a rapidly sinking ship. The Homeowners Association meeting was a turning point. Mark presented his meticulously compiled evidence with the calm precision of a seasoned attorney. Security camera footage, noise logs, statements from multiple neighbors. Each piece of documentation was a devastating blow. Karen sat in stunned silence as the association board reviewed the materials, their expressions growing increasingly serious. Her grandmother, Margaret Rodriguez, was particularly furious. The family property, inherited and carefully maintained for decades, was now at risk. Margaret had always been proud of her family's reputation in the neighborhood, and Karen's behavior was destroying everything she had worked to build. "This stops now," Margaret told her granddaughter after the meeting, her voice sharp with disappointment. "You're putting our entire family's reputation at risk." For the first time, Karen realized the true cost of her actions. It wasn't just about parties anymore. Her income, her reputation, her relationship with her family, everything was unraveling. Mark watched from a distance, never showing a hint of satisfaction. This was never about personal victory. It was about restoring the peace and dignity of the neighborhood that had been systematically destroyed by years of reckless behavior. The next party Karen attempted to host was different. No loud music, no sprawling crowds, just a subdued gathering of a few close friends, carefully monitored and quickly concluded. The transformation was remarkable and exactly what Mark had intended. But this was far from over. Karen might have been temporarily subdued, but Mark knew she was the type to push back. The real test was yet to come. Karen wasn't going down without a fight. Her carefully crafted world had been systematically dismantled, and desperation began to fuel her actions. She started digging into Mark's past, determined to find something, anything, she could use against him. Late nights were spent scrolling through public records, social media, and any digital breadcrumbs she could find. Mark's professional life seemed impeccable, too impeccable. A senior legal consultant with a spotless reputation, multiple commendations, and a network of influential contacts. But Karen was persistent. Her breakthrough came unexpectedly. A minor zoning violation from 5 years ago caught her eye. Mark had once constructed a home office extension without obtaining the precise permits. It was a minor infraction long since resolved, but Karen saw it as her lifeline. She began a calculated counterattack. anonymous complaints to the local zoning board, several social media posts hinting at Mark's questionable neighborhood conduct. She recruited a few of her remaining party friends to post cryptic comments and make vague allegations about his behavior. The pressure started to mount. Mark's law firm began asking questions. His professional reputation, which he had carefully cultivated for decades, suddenly felt fragile. Unlike Karen, he had everything to lose: a successful career, community standing, and years of professional credibility. But Mark had anticipated this. The zoning violation was ancient history, and he had meticulously maintained documentation proving he had retroactively resolved the issue. Each of Karen's attempts to undermine him was methodically countered, leaving her more frustrated and desperate. The neighborhood watched the silent war with a mix of fascination and tension. What had begun as a simple noise complaint had transformed into a complex battle of wills. Mark remained calm, always one step ahead, while Karen's desperation became increasingly apparent. Her final attempt at retaliation would prove to be her most significant mistake. One evening, Karen decided to take a more direct approach. She began spreading rumors about Mark's personal life, hinting at improprieties that were completely fabricated. But in her rush to strike back, she made a critical error. She went too far, and her allegations crossed a line that would have severe consequences. Mark had been waiting for precisely this moment. The carefully laid trap was about to spring shut, and Karen had no idea what was coming. The final move was approaching, and it would change everything. The legal summons arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning. Karen Rodriguez found herself facing a defamation lawsuit that would make her previous troubles look like a minor inconvenience. Mark had documented every single false allegation, every malicious social media post, and every attempt to damage his professional reputation. Her family's lawyer advised settlement. Margaret Rodriguez, tired of her granddaughter's destructive behavior, was no longer willing to bail her out. The financial and social consequences would be devastating. During the mediation, Mark presented his terms with surgical precision. It wasn't about money, it was about fundamental respect for the community. The conditions were clear. Karen would sell the property, move out of the neighborhood, and agree to a non-disparagement clause that would prevent her from speaking about Mark or the neighborhood in any public forum. The irony was not lost on anyone. The once popular social media influencer who had built her brand on party culture was now facing complete professional and personal collapse. Her online persona crumbled as sponsors and followers abandoned her en masse. Mark took no pleasure in the outcome. This had always been about restoring peace, protecting the neighborhood, and ensuring that community standards were maintained. As Karen packed her belongings, the street returned to the quiet, respectable environment it had been before her arrival. The Homeowners Association quietly commended Mark's approach. Other neighbors who had suffered in silence finally felt heard. Mrs. Thompson could once again enjoy her morning coffee without the threat of loud music. Mr. Garcia could sleep peacefully after his night shifts. Years later, the Rodriguez property became home to a quiet, professional couple who integrated seamlessly into the neighborhood. Mark continued his life, his garden once again pristine, his peace restored. Karen Rodriguez would eventually rebuild her life in another city, a permanent reminder etched into her experience. Actions have consequences, and some neighbors are not to be underestimated. The quiet suburban street returned to its original rhythm, orderly, peaceful, and unbroken.